It is the case that is consuming the nation right now. A neighborhood watch captain shoots and kills Trayvon Martin. George Zimmerman says he fired in self-defense. That was back on February 26th. But this gathering of protesters in Florida last night shows that many people do not believe Zimmerman. The NAACP organized a forum today calling for anyone to step forward who feels mistreated by the Sanford police, who have yet to arrest Zimmerman. And now the NAACP's leader is calling for the police chief to resign. Talking about Ben Jealous. He's the president of the NAACP. He's going to join me here next hour. Make sure you tune into that. It's going to be interesting. 800,000 signatures and counting on this online petition demanding Zimmerman's arrest. That message has made it all the way to Washington. I want you to look at this video. That's Florida Representative Frederica Wilson holding up a sign. And it reads, Trayvon Martin's murderer still at large. Days with no arrest, 25. And the city of Sanford is feeling the pressure, too. Today, the city manager, Norton Bonaparte Jr., released a letter responding to the firestorm. So follow along with me here. He writes that the police chief, Bill Lee, provided the answers, right? The first question, why was George Zimmerman not arrested the night of the shooting? And this is important, so again, follow along with me as I read this. When the Sanford Police Department arrived at the scene, he says, of the incident, Mr. Zimmerman provided a statement claiming he acted in self-defense, which at the time was supported by physical evidence and testimony. By Florida statute, law enforcement was prohibited from making an arrest based on the facts and circumstances they had at the time. Additionally, when any police officer makes an arrest for any reason, the officer must swear and affirm that he/she is making the arrest in good faith and with probable cause. If the arrest is done maliciously and in bad faith, the officer and the city may be held liable. CNN's John Zarella, live for us right now in Sanford. So they are responding, and as we understand, John, there is a hush, you're down there, you know, going on in the entire area in Sanford. Law enforcement not doing a lot of talking. People are quiet, except for the neighbors and the people who are outraged here. So as I read that letter to you, you've been looking over, you've seen the whole thing. Is there anything that stands out to you about this letter?
Yeah, you know, Don, when you read that over, there are the one that you pointed out, absolutely. I picked that up right away as well. I thought that was pretty significant. And also, well, what was it that Zimmerman was saying was his self-defense? Well, if you read in there, Zimmerman claims in his statement to police that he was walking back to his truck to await police, the arrival of police. He says he had already called the police at that point. He had gone back to his truck to await their arrival, and he claims that is when he was attacked by Trayvon Martin. That is his defense. That is his self-defense claim. And this is really about, in the body of this letter, the first time we'd actually been hearing exactly what Zimmerman is claiming was his self-defense.
And that's in the letter. But George Zimmerman, no one has heard him nor heard of him. The police department, I guess, are the only people who have spoken to him. And reporters, no one. He's gone dark. Any other response from him except for what you saw in this letter?
No, none at all, and that is true. In fact, we talked to someone today who lives in the neighborhood there, and I asked him, I said, have you talked to Mr. Zimmerman? He said, no. He said, well, I said, where is Mr. Zimmerman? He says, I don't know. He's gone underground, is the way it was put to me. So we assume, Don, that the police can get to him very quickly if need be. But no one, as far as I know, has spoken to him, and no one out in the general public knows where he is.
No spokesperson, no attorney representing him, saying, you know, standing up for him, nothing?
No, not at this point. Right. We have no indication that he has legal representation.
Let's talk about this, because I've heard other news organizations play it, enhance it, and there are some people who have some pretty strong stances on this particular thing that I'm going to talk about. There's a report, there are many reports, about a racial slur heard on the 911 call that Zimmerman made to police the night of the shooting, okay? Let's talk about that and talk about what we are doing as well as a network as it comes to that. So tell us about that comment, alleged comment on the 911, John.
Within the body of the 911 call, some people are saying and reporting that there may have been a racial slur uttered by Mr. Zimmerman during that call. CNN has had all of its half a dozen of its best audio people listen to that 911 call, listen to that excerpt, and there is nowhere in there that anyone can really clearly say.
Okay,
what
John, let me stop you there. Let me stop you there. You know when there can clearly say, that in fact he did say this comment, which is effing rhymes with boom, right? Twice apparently.
That's correct. That's
so
correct.
We've heard it. But there have been reports of other networks who said they have sent them to analysts, and that it is in fact what it is said. Again, that's not our reporting, because we are not able to confirm that's exactly what he said.
That's correct. And even the police department, CNN asked the police department here yesterday, and the police department said, look, we do not know exactly what was said there in that portion of the tape that's been brought into question.
Right. And it's out there. And so I just wanted to say that. But again, cannot confirm. He says it under his breath, allegedly. But police missed it in the beginning and said we didn't hear it, so we weren't trying to cover anything up. And again, we can't confirm. We've had lots of people listen to it and no one can make it out. But there are reports from other networks saying that they sent it to an analyst and they believe that's what he said. John, stay on this story. Great reporting.
That is correct.
We'll be getting back to you.
Sure.
Thank you very much. You know, this Trayvon Martin's death has intensified the criticism of the stand your ground law, which permits someone to use deadly force in self-defense. I'm going to go to Beth Kerr. She's a correspondent for In Session on True TV, and she joins me now. First, let's talk about the basics of this case, which is the stand your ground law and what it says. And if you look at what the city manager says, he says, listen, in order to arrest someone, there have to be a certain number of circumstances there, and this didn't rise to that level. And part of that, I would imagine, is the stand your ground law.
Right, and good afternoon, Don. Stand your ground is really just self-defense, but it takes it outside the home and the rules for not having to retreat to safety if somebody comes into your home and attacks you outside your home. It takes what's called the castle doctrine. Your home is your castle outside the home. So wherever you are is your castle at that point. You don't have to retreat to safety if you are not engaged in an unlawful activity. That's why the city manager said he's licensed to carry a gun. It would have been unlawful. If he wasn't licensed to carry a gun, he wouldn't have had this defense available. Second, you have to have a right to be where you are. Now they're taking issue with the fact that the dispatcher said, you know, you don't have to go after him, you don't have to pursue him, you could wait for the police to arrive. And third, your perception that deadly force is being used against you or whatever force has to be a reasonable one. Let's just say, Don, for the sake of this discussion, that what John Zarella just said and reported about Zimmerman's statement that Trayvon Martin attacked him. He was retreating to his car and Martin attacked him. Let's just say that happened. I don't know that it did. Zimmerman claims it did. There may be evidence to the contrary. That doesn't mean he can turn around and shoot him. Right. You can only meet force with the force that is being used against you. So he better be darn reasonable in his perception that Trayvon Martin was meeting him with deadly force.
Well, that's...
Otherwise, we'd have people getting in fistfights and somebody can shoot them and that's okay. You cannot do that.
That's what I want to ask. So from what you know about the shooting, and I think that's what you're saying here, do you believe that George Zimmerman had the grounds to shoot Trayvon Martin?
I don't know that he did. The police did. The police apparently believed that there wasn't enough evidence to charge him, and the case was going away. But after the release of the 911 tape, when people said, wait a second, there's another story here, oh, now other law enforcement authorities are involved, and they're calling for a grand jury, which is what usually happens in a shooting situation like this. You go to the grand jury with it. You let that body of citizens put people under oath, talk to witnesses, let them be the investigative body, and not just let it sit with the police department. Not that the police can't do an adequate job, but especially when you're crossing racial lines here and there are, allegations of bias, it is much safer to go into the grand jury, and that's what this grand jury will do. They will do what the police did and more.
Well, that's what I want to ask you, just hearing a lot of people talk about it. And listen, people talking about it personally are even more outraged than the people you hear on the air, African Americans especially. I mean, everyone is riled up about this, but when having conversations among themselves, African Americans are like, I can't believe this, I can't even talk about it without getting upset or that sort of thing. So let's Beth, strip away the racial component here. I know that's hard to do. right? But let's strip that away. I have seen cases, and I'm sure you have in many others, where, you know, a man will, you know, abuse his wife, domestic abuse. The wife kills the man and what have you. The woman is taken in and arrested and then goes through the process as you have just mentioned, and then faces a judge or whatever body, and they will say, there is no evidence to charge Miss Karras or Miss Lemon or whatever with the crime because the husband had been abusing her over years. Charges are dropped, you're free to go. I think that's what people are not getting here. Why is that process, why hasn't that happened?
Right. And actually, I've been talking to lawyers who are defense attorneys in Florida, and they actually have been saying to me, I don't know why Zimmerman wasn't charged. They actually think it'll be manslaughter or second-degree murder coming out of the grand jury, but we don't know if that's the case. But why he wasn't charged at that point? Now, the police are saying we didn't have probable cause. We didn't have enough evidence at that time. We don't know the extent of their investigation. Did it end that day? But the more prudent thing one could argue would be to take whatever you collect that night, go to the state attorney, their prosecutors, you know, in the county, and say, look, you know, maybe you should make a decision whether or not there should be a grand jury investigating it, calling in witnesses, and wait for the autopsy report and get toxicology on everybody involved and do a more thorough investigation. I don't know the extent, frankly, of the police investigation, but it seems like it was closed pretty quickly, and it should have gone through the process you're talking about. If not an arrest, at least the grand jury investigation. And if they indict, that indictment would serve as an arrest warrant. Okay. And he, you know, would be arrested on that.
Another point here, Beth. So in the city manager's letter, one of the questions was, what about media reenactments of the shooting incident? And so it's not really been reenactments. Everyone, and we have to agree, it is speculation. Everyone is sort of saying, trying to figure out what happened, put the pieces together. But the reason that many people are doing that is because there's been so little released, so little information released that there's not a lot to put together except for what witnesses are saying, what Trayvon Martin's family saying, what neighbors are saying. So that's how this is being pieced together. So media reenactments or what have you, that's an interesting part of it. But we don't know. The investigation has to play out. But there have been, I would imagine, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, even on people who have been convicted or have been arrested on even circumstantial evidence, far less than the evidence from witnesses and from what we're hearing about this case so far.
Well, you know, Anderson Cooper had a couple of ear and eyewitnesses to at least parts of this on the air last night. Were they spoken to by the police? Frankly, I don't know. I don't know everybody the police
those two women spoke out they were on Anderson last night. They spoke out very early on. Even this weekend we had them on. They're saying that the police wouldn't even talk to them and barely had any time for them and didn't take what they were saying into, and that's just according to them. Again, we're not trying this case here, but go on.
So that's why people are upset that the police perhaps were not thorough enough. They say that they made their decision at that time based upon what they had, but one has to question whether or not they could have done a little bit more. Obviously, more is going to be done now. It's not too late. It's not as though years have gone by. It's a month. It may be too long for the parties involved, but you know what? Justice will prevail. Maybe justice is Zimmerman isn't charged, but there will be the thorough investigation they needed done. However, they won't ever have toxicology of Zimmerman. And frankly, you know, you said take race out of this discussion, but it is a part of this case. And the African-American experience in this country is one that you cannot understand unless you are African-American.
Oh, I can understand.
And I was a prosecutor here in New York, and I know the experience, and I know what it's like in the inner city. So the bias element will be something that will be hard to ignore if, in fact, a racial epithet was uttered on that 911 tape. And
again, you don't know. Sometimes people are hypersensitive about race. It's not always race in these cases, but many times it is, and we sort of, dance around it because we want to be completely, we don't want to take a stand about it. But sometimes it is what it is. It just is what it is.
Yep.
Beth, thank you. Appreciate it.